Welcome into Out of Order, everyone. My name is Ben Mayer.
My name is Anthony Buono.
Today we're going to be talking about the Vibecession. So the first thing I would want to start with is just cover what this means for everyone who doesn't know. For like economics and politics nerds like us, we've been on this shit for over a year now.
Yeah, I mean, we're reading every inflation report, every jobs report, the Federal Reserve meeting minutes and shit. Like, we're going deep into this.
Yes.
Consistently.
But if you're not like us and you're not total nerds, Vibecession is a word that's been coined to describe how our economy is doing great by pretty much every metric, but Americans still feel like the economy is doing terribly, and they think the economy is doing terribly. So I'll first rattle off why the economy is doing great. We had growth of over 2.5% last year. We still have really strong growth starting this year. We have unemployment near a 50-year low at under 4%. Inflation was high, but has come down to under 4%, and it looks like it's lowering even more. So we have all these signs that the economy is doing great. Not to mention the stock market has been going up for the past 3-4 years. Our stock market is the strongest in the world by far.
Yeah, I mean, the NASDAQ is breaking records. S&P 500 is currently breaking records. Our GDP growth, by the way, is exceeding our pre-pandemic expectations.
Yeah.
Not only are we growing, but we're growing past what we thought we were going to grow at in 2019.
Before COVID.
Yeah. We've improved on those predictions.
Exactly. So it's shocking that then this new poll comes out. And this has been happening for a while.
Yeah.
We've been getting these opinion polls that have come out that say people just still think the economy is bad.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to get into why we might imagine that is. But a new poll came out for The Guardian, and it found that 56% of Americans think we're in a recession.
That is insane.
It's just hilarious.
So everyone, we're on the same page. A recession is defined by 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP growth.
Yes.
That's the definition of recession.
Yes.
We're nowhere near that.
We haven't had negative GDP growth since COVID, since the
COVID.
first quarter of COVID,
That's the last time we had negative GDP growth.
Yeah.
Like, what? So that's the first part.
Yes.
It's like, okay. People don't have an understanding of what growth we're
Yes.
having right now.
Basic fact that they're completely off of.
Yeah.
49% think the S&P 500 is down year to date. It is actually up 12%.
Yeah, that's insane.
Stock market is doing great. Yeah. 49%, this one's crazy to me, think unemployment is at a 50-year high.
What? Like, that's insane.
It is almost a 50-year low. It's absolutely crazy. And then this one is not so surprising. 58% say the economy is worsening due to the presidential administration.
Sure.
If you already think the economy is bad,
You're going to think of blaming it on the president.
yeah, exactly. And the only other crazy thing that I saw here is that Republicans do think that the economy is worse than Democrats think it is, but still 49% of Democrats polled said we're in a recession.
And I listen, I don't want to come across as elitist because it's not the point of this. There's a guy on Twitter, Will Stancil,
Yes.
who always gets yelled at because Will Stancil is one of the guys who really is in favor of this Vibecession interpretation, and he always gets yelled at. He's like, no, you don't get it, But listen, real wages are up over the last year. Your wages have kept up and improved over inflation.
And wages for people at the bottom of the income spectrum have risen faster than anyone else.
The bottom 10% of wage earners has seen the most rapid wage growth in the 21st century, and it's growing way faster than the upper middle class.
Yeah.
The upper middle class, the upper management class, those are the wages that have stagnated.
Yes, exactly. So what do you think is happening?
So I think there are 2 things that are going on here. I think the media likes to tell a negative story.
Yep.
I think the media likes to sell bad news.
I agree.
I think people enjoy consuming bad news. And it gets people to click on stuff. And a really great example of that is this Axios article that says why grocery bills feel so high even though food inflation is technically low. And so they go into food inflation and they try to redefine the word inflation. And so inflation means what? Inflation means the change in the price of goods over a year.
Yes.
Okay. So over the past year, food has increased by 1.1%.
So that is the inflation rate of food right now.
Yes. So what they chose to plot against this inflation rate is the cumulative change since January 2021. So they plot the cumulative change on top of the inflation. All right. So think of the inflation as the derivative of the. That's actually probably going to make it more complicated.
Yeah. If you haven't taken a calculus
if you haven't
class.
if you haven't taken a calculus class, that might be more complicated. But the point is, they're saying even though inflation's low, prices of food are still up 20% since 2021.
Yes.
And that's just not, first of all, that's not how you measure inflation. So I don't like the issue of Axios coming in and trying to redefine inflation. That's stupid.
See, I'm okay with it because I understand, just like us,
Yes.
people are all grasping at straws,
Yes.
trying to understand why do people feel so bad
And
about
that's
it.
fine.
Yeah.
But I don't like the explicit language how they were talking about how inflation has a new meaning.
Okay.
No, it doesn't. I understand that the thing you're trying to represent here by saying even though inflation is low now, it's going to take like 2 years before people get used to the new prices.
Yes.
Right? That makes sense to me.
Yes.
That's probably what's happening. It's going to take people around 2 years to really understand these new prices and accepting them as the norm.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about this later on another episode this week and more in depth on our Patreon.
Patreon.
But Walmart and Target and other big name retailers are actually going to start lowering their prices.
Yes.
And they're going to do that because people are not happy with these high prices and it's changing their consumer behavior.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the private enterprise system is going to look at that and they're going to be like, okay, I guess we got to reduce prices if we want people to keep consuming at the same rate.
Yeah.
But that's my issue. So that's why I think people are looking at it poorly right now.
Okay.
Is because the media is selling a bad story.
Okay.
And they're not accustomed to the increased prices that happened 2 years ago.
That makes sense. I think there is also, there's a media part of it, and I also think there's a social media side of this. I think what's so interesting here is these are very specific statistics. Like these words that we're talking about, is the S&P 500 up or down? Are we in a recession or not? Is unemployment rate at a 50-year high? These are very black and white questions that people are getting wrong, which means they're not only... It means they're not getting reports on like the specific data that's coming out. They're not looking at that. And they're also, yet they are politically involved enough, or they are getting enough information to tell them that things are bad.
Right. It's not like they said no opinion.
Exactly.
It's not like they said, I don't know, what's the S&P 500? It's not like they said that.
Yes.
They said it's actively down.
Yes. So I think that gives me the idea that these are not people watching the news as much. It's like this poll is probably capturing a lot of politically uninvolved people. And it's people who are on TikTok and are scrolling and are seeing people complain about how they're never going to own a house.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, listen, I don't want to. If you're in poverty and you're struggling, we get it, and we believe the government needs to be there to help you get back on your feet, all of that, okay? We believe in the decommodification of a lot of goods, okay? We talk about that all the time.
You're so angelic.
But, listen, it's not the case that 25-year-olds are buying houses in 1950. That's not what was happening.
Yeah.
This imagined past that you've been sold on from 1950s comic magazines,
Sure.
they're not true.
Yeah, exactly.
They were never true.
It is selling a greater past than there was and a worse present than there is. And so I feel like because the media environment is so fragmented, and it's not just the New York Times, it's not just MSNBC, it's not even just Fox News or Fox Business, because Fox News and Fox Business, they still report the actual numbers.
Yeah, they actually say like, oh, S&P 500 up today, Dow Jones up today.
Exactly. So like to me, it's people who are just... It is a vibe session because all they're getting as far as their information is vibes. They're not getting any of the numbers.
Well, the TikTok is a really good example because there's no room for nuance on TikTok, obviously. But in addition to that, there's a big separation between people who watch the news and people who read the news. There's a big separation of how of their opinions that come out of that. And people who read the news are more likely to think that the economy is doing well.
Sure.
People who watch the news are more likely to think the economy is doing bad. People who read the news are more likely to support Biden. People who watch the news are more likely to support Trump. So what that tells me is when you're watching something, you're only getting the vibes.
Sure.
And that's something that we're trying to break on this show.
Yeah.
That's one of the attempts is to kind of get past the vibes and kind of go into the data, because that's what we do. We're data analysts. That's like our job.
Yes, literally.
That's literally what we do. So that's what we're trying to attempt to bring on the show and break through the vibes, because we don't want people to get opinions on vibes and through rhetoric. That's not the goal.
No, because I mean, and it's funny because people try to say like, don't give me the data when I feel like I'm doing like shit. And the whole point is that the data is actually a better storyteller of what is happening in the here and now than your particular vibes or the vibes that your TikTok algorithm accumulates for you.
There's a reason we look down on analysis by anecdote, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason we do that.
Yes.
Because you're not taking into account the full picture when you zoom in on only one instance.
Exactly.
So like, oh, I've had a hard time finding a job. I understand that. That stinks. I hope you find a job. But that doesn't change the fact that the unemployment rate is at a historic low.
Exactly.
And you say, oh man, it sucks I have to work 2 jobs. I'm like, it does suck you have to work 2 jobs. And we feel bad for you. That sucks. You shouldn't have to do that.
No.
But that doesn't change the fact that only 1.2% of Americans work 2 jobs.
And it doesn't explain the fact that half of people still think unemployment is at a 50-year high.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That is the disconnect that like remains so wild and I think just very telling of the media environment, the information space that we're currently in.
I'm going to end on one more note.
Yeah.
The inflation under President Reagan and President Biden is almost exactly the same. But in 1984, when Ronald Reagan was up for re-election, no one thought that the economy was doing bad. No one thought that inflation was going to sink Ronald Reagan's election chances.
That's wild.
He ran the largest landslide election since 1936. And it's the exact same inflation as Joe Biden, literally almost 1-to-1.
That's wild.
Now, what does this mean? This is also another thing. We are part of an age, our demographic, the millennials older than us, we grew up in an age of almost no inflation. We grew up in an age of inflation of 1.5% to 2%.
Yes.
We grew up in an age of quantitative easing where we had 0% interest rates and money was cheap. And you know, you can get a mortgage for 2.5%. Those days are gone.
Yeah.
And it's going to take people time to adjust, because a 3% inflation rate, that might be the new normal.
It is not that bad.
It's not like that bad either.
By historic standards,
no, the
not
average inflation rate in the United States is 3.5%.
Yeah.
So a 3% isn't actually terrible. And I'm so sick of the analysts caring so much about a 0.1% difference in the CPI reports. I'm sick of it. Because it's not, if we're actually talking about this in a way that's with a historical analysis frame of reference, what are we going on about? Now, I understand that it's a departure from how things were in the last decade. Yeah. But the way things were in the last decade were a response to the financial crisis of 2008. True. And that's why interest rates were down and inflation was so far down.
I mean, I would push back a little bit against it is still, I think there's validity in the economic consensus that inflation should be around 2%, if not around 2.5%. For the healthiest economy.
I don't disagree with that.
Yes. But because of that should almost be saying 3.5% isn't so bad. That's it's just a little bit higher. Literally, Argentina is dealing with 200% inflation. Like, we have it so much better than almost everywhere else, which is why we have to keep talking about the Vibecession.
Yes.
Because it's just so weird and so disconnected from reality.